Coming up on Need to Know, the remaining presidential contenders have all made promises on what they would do if elected. Some even vowing to make Rochester better than it stands right now. Area political scientists weigh in on the policies and promises of the candidates and the real impact they could have on our region. That's next. Also on the show, two local journalists track an ongoing investigation into an unsolved murder from 1979. They're releasing their findings in a new podcast. The lingering questions and varying perspectives into the young victim's death just ahead. And call it an event for the imagination. We've got your first look at some impressive inventions coming right out of Rochester at this year's Imagine RIT. Need to Know starts right now. From Bernie Sanders' plan to make public colleges and universities tuition-free to Donald Trump's pledge to get rid of the Common Core, among many other things, presidential elections are littered with policy proposals and campaign promises. But when you break them all down, what's realistic and likely to stick, meaning get through Congress? And do these policies and promises trickle down to us in the Rochester region? I've invited a few political science professors to join me to share their diverse perspectives and to bring some clarity to this year's presidential election. At the table is Wes Renfro, Assistant Professor of Political Science at St. John Fisher College, Sarah Burns, Assistant Professor of Political Science at RIT, and Timothy Nealon, Professor and Chairperson of the History and Political Science Department at Nazareth College. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here. So, Sarah, when we spoke in the fall, you said to me that your students would be going all in on this year's presidential election, and you certainly have been given a lot of material to work with. So I want to know, how would you describe this ever-evolving presidential election as it stands right now?
Well, I would say first that it's basically made fools of soothsayers and oracles, right? And so everyone who thought, well, let's not take Trump seriously, there's no reason for that, and then realized all too late that he was actually a real contender because there was just so much discontent in the country and so many people who felt abandoned by the establishment. And comparatively, Bernie Sanders also, unbelievably has done so well. And so to look at the landscape based on those two candidates and see how upset the country is, it's really interesting to see that. Yeah, so that would be what I would say. Yeah.
I want to piggyback on that because just this week, Republicans Ted Cruz and John Kasich, they bowed out of the presidential race, leaving Donald Trump the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party. And as you said, for months, these predictions have been made that Trump would not make it to this point. And so I want to know, clearly he has supporters in Monroe County and around the nation. What is he offering exactly that is really resonating with people? And Wes, I want to give this to you. How is a political novice, gaining the trust of voters to such an extent?
I think that his rhetoric plays very well with, white working class individuals who believe that in the wake of the post-recession, they haven't gotten a fair deal. I grew up in a rural industrial town in Ohio, and I know that town has strong support for Trump because the factory jobs are gone, and he's able to explain that to folks in a way that they believe is plausible and true, and they're angry, and they think that he is someone who's standing up for their interests, and that he's someone who might say things that are sometimes unpalatable but are nonetheless true.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to dig into the issues just a bit, the policy proposals of this election. So according to a Gallup poll, both Republicans and Democrats agree on the importance of the candidate's position on four things: the economy, terrorism, jobs, and health care. So when it comes to jobs and the economy, Trump says he'll get rid of the nation's debt, and he says he'll be the greatest jobs-producing president that God ever created. That's a direct quote from his campaign site. Sanders says he will rebuild America. With his Rebuild America Act, a $1 trillion investment will modernize the nation's infrastructure, creating more than 13 million jobs. And then Clinton says she'll give working families a raise and tax relief, plus create good-paying jobs. What makes what they're proposing different than what we've heard from presidential contenders in the past, Tim?
Well, I think what makes Trump different is if you look at his economic policy, it's tied up with his foreign policy, and not to to be too trite, but he's constantly saying, "I'm going to fix this by building a wall," and that wall becomes more than just a solid, a barrier to people coming in from, say, Mexico or other countries. I think it really is a kind of almost neo-isolationist. He's going to withdraw from some American commitments if he doesn't see that the investment has been well used. He's going to then use maybe even the threat of doing that in order to get other countries to agree to different kind of trade deals. And I think that's really what's going to drive his economic policies, his foreign policy. That's why he says he's going to create jobs here. He's going to threaten to American businesses who want to invest overseas, but at the same time, he says he's going to lower the business rate to like 15%, which is going to make this whole idea of going overseas ridiculous anyway. So, and he's going to cut the taxes down. He's going to have a new simplified tax code. Like it's going to be what, like 10%, 20%, 25%. That's all going to help out. I think that's really different. On the Sanders side, this is something that Barack Obama has just expressed regret for in the New York Times interview. He wishes he had invested more in infrastructure. That would have stimulated the economy more and helped out. And on Clinton's side, I think she's pretty much taking the same lines. I would say that she's a neoliberal in the sense that she's using a kind of global investment strategy to grow American jobs, at the same time as using regulation in order to increase wages and to eliminate or at least reduce some of that wage gap that we've been seeing the last 8 to 20 years.
And if I can jump in for a minute, I want to point out that there's a disconnect that I think citizens oftentimes overestimate the degree to which individual presidents can influence things like economic growth. And politicians, for their part, can't own up to the fact that the president, the most capable, powerful person in the world, isn't actually all that powerful in stimulating the national or the global economy. And so these folks say things which, frankly, are not that likely to translate into huge economic gains because we live in a global economy that's simply too big for one state and one actor to command.
Yeah, I think
that's it. Yeah, I was going to say, do they overpromise and underdeliver? I mean, how much of what they're saying, to jump onto that, I don't know if you were planning to go there as well, are they able to actually deliver on? And I saw an article with PolitiFact, and they were talking about what President Obama has actually been able to do versus what he said he wanted to do.
Well, you see also then a very big difference between, let's say, the three candidates that you have. Trump saying, well, we're going to basically like close ourselves in, and we're going to get everyone else to pay for all the things that they want, and we're going to have essentially sort of protectionist policies. So comparatively, Bernie Sanders has a more positive message of, well, no, let's build the infrastructure in the country, and we see there's good reason to think that you can stimulate growth and stimulate the economy through that. But then I think actually Clinton probably has the most plausible and possible to get through Congress policies, right? And so if we think through what the three different candidates are offering, the difficulty then for Clinton, building off of what you said, is that her policies demonstrate the complexity of the system, and that doesn't get through to voters nearly as much as we'll build a wall or we'll make university free, right? So these are the kinds of things that are easier to say than get done, but Clinton wants to say, well, these are the things that I think we need to do, and this is how to get it done, but she then gets into these problems where she says something like, well, I'm in favor of a $15 wage or a $12 wage, and it makes sense to have a $15 minimum wage in New York State, but in other states, that might cause job loss. And so if she said, across the board, let's have a $15 minimum wage, you could attack her by saying, well, wait a second, in, Montana, it doesn't make sense to have a $50 minimum wage because the cost of living is so much lower. So, she does balance those things out, but I think it costs her when voters are looking at and balancing out who has the best policies.
When the candidates were here in the Rochester region, they made multiple promises to area residents, as they do when they travel to various areas around the country. Is there a sense in terms of what Rochester residents, Monroe County residents want? What do American voters want? Are we able to really tap into that based on the trends of this election, what they're looking for?
I think what you're asking is a bit too global. I think we're looking at constituent groups, and that's one of the ways that we look at voters. We break them down into various special interest groups or demographics, right? And so I think, Bernie Sanders is appealing to millennials who really are not that tied to capitalism, are not threatened by socialism, and really would like to see a major change. I think what you see is Hillary is tapping into people who are economically economically better off, people who want to see changes, but a lot of times they want to see changes that are going to have an effect that will be slower over time, and I think that's why her policies are much more clearly laid out. And then you look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump is appealing to people who feel that they've been victimized. I mean, here's the thing, his language is a language of victimization. You know, if things don't go well for him, you know, the system is unfair or rigged against him. Like, he himself plays the victim. So I think what that is people who have been left behind in this economy, people who are fearful of being left behind, they really like Trump. Some of them like Sanders, but I think a lot of them feel that Trump really will deliver because he has this image, this icon, and he is a forceful individual in both language and the way he carries himself. So I think he's telegraphing certain kinds of characteristics that voters really feel they want. And so that's how we would break it down. And we could break it down further into issues of, you know, race and class, income. So I think really it's hard to say, but I think what Monroe County wants is pretty much what the rest of the country wants. That is, we really are a microcosm of what we're seeing nationwide with people who feel left behind, or people who want a different kind of future, or people who think that Obama's done a decent job, but just we need to tinker it a little bit. So that's why Hillary would be like a, you know, third Obama term.
Yeah. I want to know, Clinton and Trump are currently leading in terms of delegate count. That being said, if this whirlwind of campaigning that we have, if after all this we have a Clinton and Trump ticket, some reports I've read have said, they've described this situation as a pick your poison battle. Why is that, Wes?
So I'm not convinced that there's tons of folks who are enthusiastic about either candidate. And so one sort of prediction that I do have is that voter participation will probably stay flatlined or even decline in 2016. We saw modest increases in 2008 and 2012. I don't think there's a huge amount of enthusiasm across the board for either candidate.
Yeah, they both have really high unfavorables. Trump has historically high unfavorables, but when I was looking at this, I realized that Clinton actually has still unfavorables around 45 to 49%, depending on which group you're looking at. So considering that, there's so much that, you know, we're not really quite sure who's going to actually do well in this election, considering like how much people dislike both candidates.
I would disagree, though. I think actually, though, it's the fear factor that people will come out to vote against, if not necessarily for. So I think that might increase levels. And I do think that Trump's narrative will bring in some disaffected voters who haven't voted in the past. I mean, the Republicans for years have said there's millions of evangelicals out there that just stay home during elections. And if you could tap into this, you know, this group that feels disaffected, and an outsider doing that may well do that. Or, hey, you never know. You could see a third party yet.
And one thing that I guess that I do want to point out, though, is that the Democratic candidate has won what we call the popular vote in 5 of the past 6 elections. 2000, of course, Al Gore gets more votes than does George W. Bush. And the demographics strongly favor any Democratic candidate, at least at the level of the White House, while Republicans do quite well in the House of Representatives. And so with that generic headwind at Clinton's back, I think it's a tough sell that folks are going to turn out for Trump.
Well, definitely an interesting election to watch, and much more to come. So a special thank you to my guests for joining me today. And election 2016 coverage continues here on WXXI TV and on WXXI Radio. You can also track our reports online at WXXInews.org. What happened to Tammy Jo Alexander? It's a question that's been asked for more than 35 years by investigators, friends, family members, a Western New York community, and now 2 local journalists examining the evidence of the unsolved murder of a teenage girl found in Caledonia in November 1979. While it took decades to identify her body, a killer remains at large. But a new podcast hosted by WXXI's Veronica Volk and the Democrat Chronicle's Gary Craig hopes to find some answers. The podcast is called Finding Tammy Jo. Joining me to discuss the podcast and developments in the case is WXXI News reporter and producer Veronica Volk, a member of the Democrat Chronicle's watchdog team, veteran reporter Gary Craig, and former Livingston County Sheriff John York, who spent more than 2 decades investigating the case of Tammy Jo Alexander. Welcome to all of you, and I appreciate you being here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So to begin, Veronica, who was Tammy Jo Alexander, and what was it about her and her story that made both of you say there's something here and we need to do a podcast on this story?
I think it was the fact that we didn't know who Tammy Jo Alexander was for so long. She was an unidentified girl for 36 years, I want to say.
36 years.
And it was really the mystery of her identity that I think drew me in initially.
And it's interesting. So you chose a podcast as the platform to share this story. And I want to know, Gary, if you have advantages with a podcast because you don't have the time limits that we sometimes have with, shorter news segments, and also the ability to really personalize a story. This is a tragic story, a crime story. Are there benefits to sharing it in this type of a way that you think maybe listeners and viewers, those watching, may not realize when they first think podcast and unsolved murder?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the podcast, obviously there's sort of the technical things you said about you're not bound by a certain length. But there's something about sort of the audio storytelling that I think just is engaging to people when they've sort of become more fixated by it or more captured by it. And I personally, I just really like that form of storytelling, even though it's not what I necessarily typically do. And I think for the audience, it really allows them to dive deeper into the story. And as Veronica said, hopefully find out who this young girl was who ended, her life was ended so tragically.
Well, Sheriff York, I understand you were a sergeant at the time, and when the body of this teenage girl was discovered in a cornfield on November 10th, 1979. And we have a brief clip from your interview for this podcast, just to give viewers a little taste of what they can expect from the series. And we'll take a listen.
This kid came from out of the area. I almost felt that from the get-go because we couldn't find any identification. I thought to myself, if you're going to strip her from identification, turn her pockets inside out, you know she's not from this area. You know we're going to have a tough time with this. I thought that in my head. She had a halter top tan. So you knew you didn't wear a halter top in the Northeast in November and get a suntan. So she had to come from the Sun Belt someplace.
John, you lived with this case for decades, and I want to know what was it about this case and about Tammy Jo? I read articles and you said her story could not be forgotten. What was it about her that you couldn't forget and this Western New York community couldn't forget as well?
I always said, if we let go, it's done. If we don't bring this to resolve and give her justice, who's going to? I really believe that. Our agency believed that. The people that continue to follow it up believe that. I think no matter what happens, when you become a victim of crime, you have a right to expect justice. Here's a child shot, dumped roadside, shot again, stripped of identification and left roadside. Somebody has to give that child justice. It was our obligation, responsibility, and she had a right to that justice.
For those who are watching right now and they're learning about this story for the very first time, can you explain the process and what it took, the length of time in terms of, and why the length of time to identify this young woman?
I think we all expected, as difficult as we knew it was going to be, that sooner or later somebody'd come forth. We started locally, we processed the scene, we recovered the bullet from under the ground. We did everything that needed to be done at the crime scene, then we began by public information and distribution. People just like yourselves sitting at this table, we hoped that you'd put it on the air, people would see it, they'd read about it, then it went from local to the county, to the region, to the state, nationally, internationally, and we spent 36 years running down lead after lead. We ran over 10,000 leads in this case. We sent flyers and photographs to every police agency in the United States through a BOCES law enforcement class in Mount Morris. Originally, I used to go to the National Sheriff's Association meetings across the United States. I'd take these flyers by the thousands and distribute them. I had this in the Florida Sheriff's Magazine. I can't even tell you how many times. We thought sooner or later somebody would come forth. We sent all the clothing to specialty labs. We met with the FBI. We met with all kinds of different organizations, hoping somebody would give us new technology that would bring us to resolve. But we finally felt that the answer was going to be the internet, and the internet finally was the answer. Thanks to Carl Koppelman and Laurel Noel.
this story was important for both of you, for this to be about the victim and explaining the victim's story. And that being said, talk about your approach, because I'm sure there's sensitivity in doing just that.
Sure. I think part of that comes with me and Gary coming to the table together and saying that this was going to be a story about Tammy Jo. It speaks to the title also, Finding Tammy Jo, is about more than just finding out, you know, her story and her identity and who killed her, but really who was she as a person in her short life, and what was it about her that inspired this community of people to kind of rise up and adopt her story. So it was really important to me to kind of get to that, get to her identity and get to what made her so special and so captivating. Because I think that there are other kind of media around. This podcast has been compared to Serial, of course, and there are shows like, I think it's Making a Murderer and The Jinx that maybe tell stories of the accused, and they tell stories about, you know, the men who are accused of these crimes, and I didn't want it to be like that. So. What are some of the lingering questions that remain based on your work with this story?
I mean, there are so many. I'm sure the same questions the police are trying to figure out. You know, we know some of her previous year before, you know, she was killed here, but there are these big gaps. We know she did a hitchhiking trip out west with a friend and then came back home, but you know, there's still very little information in the way that adds up to how she ended up in New York. There's this mystery sort of about a ministry in Georgia that it housed parolees. And it was run by a minister there, and she spent some time there. It appears possibly as a volunteer. I don't think it wasn't any criminal conviction that got her there. And there's still a lot of questions about, is it possible that somebody from there is who she ended up with, but that's still unknown.
Great work on this, and something for people to definitely check out. I want to thank you for joining me today, and you can follow along with this podcast series, Finding Tammy Jo. Subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. New episodes, are being released every Sunday. For behind-the-scenes footage, photographs, and more, be sure to check out the podcast website, findingtammyjo.com. Innovation and creativity. Those are two things that are front and center this weekend for the annual Imagine RIT Festival. Sasha Ann Simons of WXXI's Innovation Trail joins us now with a sneak peek.
Thanks, Helene. Organizers tell me it's like the Innovation Super Bowl for these students. And in its 9th year, they say Imagine RIT is bigger and better. From a walk through the jungle to a bumpy ride on a big rig, visitors are in for an all-around fun experience. Now here's a look at some of this year's creative gadgets.
I was going on an interview for a roller coaster and ride design company for engineering, because that's what I've wanted to do since I was like 20 months old. And he said, yeah.
David Strzwinski couldn't even read the first time his family brought him to the state fair, but he was already doing his research. Only a toddler at the time, Strzwinski asked a ton of questions.
I was fascinated with rides and how they work.
The Rochester Institute of Technology student is wrapping up his 4th year in the mechanical engineering program. For his latest project, he's dabbling in the amusement park business, creating roller coasters and Ferris wheels with a group of more than a dozen students.
Working hours and hours and hours, multiple nights a week from 7 o'clock at night to 11 o'clock at night, testing and testing and testing.
And talk about another blast from Strzwinski's childhood past. The brightly colored rides are made entirely out of K'NEX, a construction toy. The team is preparing for the annual Imagine RIT Festival, a one-day-only mega showcase of all the innovation and creativity that happens at RIT.
Last year it was about 20 rides. This year it's going to be 34 with 5 roller coasters.
Organizers are expecting more than 35,000 people of all ages to attend and experience a mix of interactive presentations, hands-on demonstrations, and exhibits. Barry Culhane is the event chair.
We want people in our community and beyond to see the diversity of programs and opportunities and how RIT can respond quickly to the needs in business and industry.
The engineering students in particular have spent a great deal of time creating technology to help people, from aging seniors to people who are deaf, blind, or individuals with other physical challenges. On the other side of campus, inside the Golisano Institute for Sustainability, what looks like a giant video game is also being tweaked for its turn in the spotlight.
The simulator has 3 components to it. And so there's the plasma screens in the back. There's this 2 processors here that generate the virtual environment that you're driving through, and another one to do all the computational intensive tasks. And then there's this rumble chair here to simulate the feel of a truck.
The truck simulator is meant to teach people about their eco-driving behaviors, like the amount of emissions they generate as they operate the vehicle, and how to practice better fuel efficiency as they drive their routes.
The type of driving behavior you exhibit should reflect what you do in the real world, right? And so rather than have all these trucks in the field retrofitted with the data collection tools, we can test out some of the ideas here in the simulator before we invest further money in trying this out in the field.
But we just upload that to our Arduino board, or our board there. Takes a couple seconds.
Just days away from the event, and it's down to the wire, or the sensor. The theme park team is still putting the finishing touches on their biggest attraction, a 22-foot-long roller coaster that can launch from 2 different points.
Yeah, so this is a good example of when things don't go as planned. Be ready to go a bit crazy about it, but it all works out in the end.
Every time something goes wrong, they have to tweak the coaster just a tad and relaunch it again.
And eventually, success. For these students, watching their hard work pay off is the icing on the cake.
They get a win-win because they get to practice their presentation skills to all different levels of people, from children to grandparents. But this is something they love. It's part of who they are.
For the Innovation Trail, I'm Sasha Ann Simons. Now Imagine RIT is happening this Saturday in Henrietta on the RIT campus, rain or shine, from 10 to 5. An hour before the event officially begins, some students will be competing to win Dr. Dessler's Challenge. Now that's a competition put forth by RIT President Bill Dessler. This year, researchers put their access and inclusion themed projects to the test in the yearly contest. All are welcome to stop by.
Thank you, Sasha. And that wraps up this edition of Need to Know, Rochester's news magazine. I'm your host, Helene Bianduti-Hofer. Thank you for joining me tonight and throughout the weekend. I'll see you next week right here on WXXI TV.